So this is, of course, as we know, for the live action short film category, and your film was Please Hold.
It's been an exciting month since we found out about the nomination, because I think the Academy does a good job of sort of hyping it up for the month leading up to the Oscars.
Your connect with Tyeb Mehta as well. No one's really, I don't know if I'm mistaken, no one's spoken about it. I haven't read any interviews.
No, I don't think people really know because, yeah.
And he was so harsh on himself, as a strict perfectionist.
Yeah, I think that's probably something I've inherited from him, is being very, very harsh on.
I'm going to talk about that now. Hi everyone, welcome to Hunar Charcha online right here on Hunar TV. I know it's been quite a while, but I promise you it's been worth all the wait, because we have someone very special once again on Hunar Charcha, someone who's just walked the red carpet for the Oscars, and not just as a guest, but as a nominee. We have ace cinematographer with us, Farhad Ahmed. Thank you so much for being with us here.
Yeah, thank you, Zahir. Thank you for having me.
It's been such an incredible weekend, as you were mentioning earlier. Tell me, how does it all feel? Has it sunk in? Have you moved on, or was it just another day, just another moment, just another day at work, and you're back to your grueling schedule yet again?
It's been an exciting month since we found out about the nomination, because I think the Academy does a good job of sort of hyping it up for the month leading up to the Oscars. So with some events and some, industry things that are happening. And, the day itself, Sunday, was pretty special, because I hadn't met this team for a few months. I'd been out of town on another job. And so being able to celebrate with them in the hours leading up to the event, and then sort of being present at the ceremony with them was really special.
There is an 89.5% chance you will be found guilty. This ruling will likely carry a sentence of 45 to 47 years in prison.
More info about my trial.
Your trial will be ready in up to 90 days.
What am I accused of? What is the crime of the defendant?
The defendant is Mateo Torres.
I want to speak to a human being. Please. Human being.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Fuck!
Please try again.
So this is, of course, as we know, for the live action short film category, and your film was Please Hold. And I've seen parts of it. For our viewers, of course, it is available on HBO Max. It's a short 19 to 20 minutes film. And it's a very grim reality. It's dark comedy, but Farhad, it's so close to reality. And how did you visualize the film in the sense, to keep the feel of it light-hearted, as well as being very hard-hitting?
Certainly one of the challenges from very early on in the process of putting the film on its feet was getting the tone just right, because we always knew that it was a pretty grim subject when you sort of dig into it. It's about criminal justice, marginalized communities, and sort of how somebody can get lost in the system, and also this very dangerous relationship that we are increasingly forming with technology. And we wanted to offset that from the very beginning with a bit of comedy that would help people sort of engage with the film as a piece of culture, as a piece of entertainment, not just as something to keep at an arm's length and consume in an educational capacity. So we worked pretty hard on it at the beginning, and really tried to figure out how far into the future it would be to set that things are different versus how relatable sort of the environment would be and how real it would all seem. And we landed on wanting to set it just a few steps into the future. So everything is very recognizable. And a lot of what I did was sort of supporting that by always having this balance of visual textures. So we had some of the moments, where he's at his most desperate. It's, drawing from the portraiture of sort of the post-war period and very, very much like, trying to show how much he suffered, and really there's not much hope that he can see for himself. And then on the other hand, we had the moments where he's sort of having this banter with the animated AI on the screen, and that's something that you might see in let's say a moment in your living room when you're trying to tell Alexa to play a song and she plays the wrong song, or when your phone starts calling. Yeah, you can immediately relate to it. So I think it was always playing that balance of like, this is something really extreme and really crazy that's happening to someone in the future, yet it's also something that I can see happening in my living room today.
The scene doesn't change much because after a couple of minutes when the protagonist is inside in lockup, it's the same scene. How was that visually a challenge for you to keep it the same and still hold the attention of the viewer?
Yeah, it's definitely, when you talk to cinematographers, I think something that a lot of people want to avoid is shooting, someone against two walls, because it immediately limits the sort of visual possibilities that are open to you. I never really saw it like that, and this film, because I think it's so much the internal journey of this one character, I think it actually gave us a lot of visual scope in terms of how close we were physically to him, how much the camera was moving, and we did some things with the light in the room to show sort of a passage of time because he's in there for a long time.
I've seen your other films as well. Would you say that your visual language is categorized into a certain style, or does it drastically change with every film?
That's an excellent question, and I think that's something that I've struggled with, in all the years that I've been making images, is how much of my work is a personal signature or a personal aesthetic that I bring to the project, and how much of it is a reflection of what's in the material.
Yeah.
And I think if we're being completely honest with ourselves as artists, there's definitely something that we bring to the story, which is probably why that story resonates with us and why we decide to do the project. So I wouldn't say that 100% of the images are coming from the text or the story. There's definitely something that I brought to it, which maybe, what we're talking about now, this sort of simplicity and elegance that I try to bring to the work. Yeah. But definitely when I set out to put together a visual language or to start to develop this grammar, I'm not thinking about my own style at all. It's, if anything, it comes in despite my sort of wanting to keep myself out of the process as much as I can. I'm drawing always for inspiration from the text. And when we're on set, from the performances and the blocking and the work that we're doing with the director. So there is an aesthetic component to it, but definitely not on a conscious level. I'm never thinking like this should look like a Farhad shot or something like that. I mean, the highest compliment.
No, but I asked because I do notice a signature style. I do notice keeping the screen very spare, less cluttered. And also having limited colors. It's not a monochrome, but still dealing with very limited tones and colors. So,
of course, yeah. I mean, of course, all those are very intentional decisions. I think those decisions are. I'll try to think about what the story needs, but I try not to do more than absolutely necessary. I think that's my approach to cinematography: is to do the bare minimum, but not do any less. So I'm always trying to be there for the audience to help them along so they don't feel like they're just being sort of bombarded with information or not given enough information. But I don't want to be in their way, and I definitely don't want to be in their thoughts. I think if someone doesn't notice the work of the cinematographer, for me, that's the best sort of experience that the audience can have in the theater. So I try to have a light hand and a gentle touch whenever I can.
Can we talk about where all your influences have come from? Of course, there has, talking about popular cinema, be it Hollywood in Life of Pi, or be it Bollywood in Kamine, where you have worked with the best of filmmakers, and then going ahead and making your own award-winning films, such as Crimson Man and Green, that is spoken about a lot, recognized at the Sundance. Are your influences coming from a lot of places, I'm sure, because that's usually a journey of a creative person. But in your understanding, what really has influenced you the most? Whose visual language has had a greatest impact on your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something again that one thinks about often, and I think I've been really lucky and privileged to have sort of grown up in a house with a lot of art and photographs and music, and not just those things, but also folk art. Like block printing and weaving and all the other things that we have such a rich tradition of in India.
Right.
And I think all that sort of draws on you. I draw inspiration from the most unusual things. Sometimes it would be a piece of music that makes you think of the rhythm of a scene should be a particular way, or the way that a particular artist might use a color, like you were talking about colors earlier, and we have in our movie this very particular kind of tone of green and red. And
Yes.
we had looked at a painting of Lucian Freud, a portrait that he had done, and that had really kind of resonated with us as sort of like distilling down what this character's grief and anguish was, and that somehow those colors made their way in a sort of semi-conscious way into the movie. So it's a very difficult process to talk about, but I look at the work of some landscape photographers. Ansel Adams, of course, is one of my heroes in terms of composition. I think he did a lot of very important work. And then Lucian Freud, who's a portraitist from the 20th century. I really like his work. And then I've been recently studying pottery. I've been doing ceramics for the last few years, and that's delved me into this tradition of ceramics and pottery that is such an old art tradition all over the world, especially in India. And that's been
that's very interesting. How do you translate that experience to your visual sense on camera?
Well, it's all about form, so pottery is about form and the play of color, and when you work with glazes and different kinds of clay, the way that a glaze might where it's thicker, it might be a little white and creamy, and as it becomes thin, it becomes burnt in the oven and it becomes this sort of rich umber color. So you start to think about how the interaction of color over a particular shape or a line, and I mean it's endlessly inspiring.
You've spoken about your influences, and at home and with family as well. Your parents have been filmmakers, and your grandfather, you're in fact the only grandson of the Tyeb Mehta. And did his work influence you? Because his work was phenomenal as far as the modern Indian art is concerned, and established a new, fresh language of being absolute minimalist and using huge swathes of color, as many have said, as ice cream colors. And to what extent has his style seeped into your work, if at all?
Sure. I'll just jump in for a second and say that I have a brother and two cousins. So my grandfather had 4 grandsons.
Okay.
But
you're still the grandson of the Tyeb Mehta, so
yeah, definitely, undoubtedly, undeniably. My grandfather has been a very important figure in my life. I was so grateful to have, spent my childhood and then sort of the beginning of my adult life with him. And, he's been gone for more than 10 years now. But even now, I think he's very much a part of my creative journey. And a lot of the things that I'm doing now, I'm thinking about the lessons I learned from him as a child and observing him work. And I take a lot of inspiration from how he not just did his work, but also lived his life and handled with a lot of dignity, being a working artist and a family person at the same time, which I think is a struggle that not many people talk about.
Absolutely.
But talking about the creative, talking for a moment about the creative, I'll tell you a small story, which is that like you said, my grandfather, his work has these broad swaths of color and very strong lines. And as a child, we would be welcome in his studio to watch him work or spend some time while he was working. And sometimes he would ask you, so what do you think? And I think the fact that it was not very complex work from a child's point of view, it looked easy to understand, yet it was obviously a very deep sort of work carrying a lot of meaning to him.
Right.
It made you think about the smallest of things. So it made you, even as a child, without really knowing what you were doing, it made you investigate sort of, why is that line creased in this particular way? Why is there a color like this and then a color that goes like this, which maybe pushes the frame away from you? So I think he did a lot without really taking himself and this conversation with his grandson too seriously. He did a lot to encourage me to start thinking about how line and color and the absence of line and color can really create three-dimensionality and dynamism in a frame. So a lot of the work that I do compositionally and in terms of color, I think, doesn't draw inspiration directly from the way that his works turned out, but definitely draws inspiration from his process and how he sort of talked about it and thought about it.
What do you think could be newer genres in your industry? Because there's so many boxes that one is breaking out and, moving laterally back and forth. What could be the new genres in your industry?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think, so much of what we talk about is because of the films that we loved growing up. I talked about musicals and Westerns, and those are definitely genres from a bygone era. Not to say that you can't do those things now, but they're not of our time inherently. I think what's of our time, and something that I've been working on a lot, has been, films that break the fourth wall and address the audience directly. Mm-hmm. I think that's been really engaging because we're so used now to these screens that are present in our lives and people are talking at us from screens. Mm-hmm. I think that's something, and I did some work in virtual reality a few years ago. And this is a very powerful concept in virtual reality because you're actually inside a world, moving around, you're in control of sort of like what you're looking at. And then when people talk to you directly, it hits you straight in the heart because someone is actually looking you in the eyes and telling you something. So whether it's someone who's telling you, a piece of bad news, or whether it's somebody who's introducing you to something, it really draws you in. And I'm definitely interested in exploring this idea of breaking the fourth wall and addressing the audience directly and seeing how it can sort of sharpen this connection that we have with the audience.
Mm-hmm. And do you not think that would be invasive? I mean, we're of course talking about this dimension. We're talking about metaverse. To what extent it can be damaging, being that invasive?
I mean, I don't think it's inherently invasive. I think, the audience makes a certain contract with the filmmaker when they sit down and press play. And of course, they can walk away from it at any time.
So your granddad, Tyeb Mehta, had also made a film, and which had won an award as well. But that was, of course, several decades ago. That was also on a very grim subject. And a lot of it was also explicit to an extent in dealing with that subject. And what do you think about his style of making that film now that you're in the profession?
I think Kudal is an amazing film. I wish it was accessible to more people. And, it's really, without really having derived from Kudal in my own artistic journey, I can see how so much of my inspiration is reflected in that film because my inspiration is my grandfather's work to a certain extent, and how he uses punctuation and music and dance and compositions, and people are walking through spaces and architecture. It's a very evolved and nuanced kind of use of the medium because it really incorporates all these other elements. It's a black and white film, so it's very stark, and it has dance, it has music, it has these very particular graphic images that are edited, and a very clever use of montage to bring the audience in. I think he does everything that we're talking about in terms of my process of carrying an audience through the journey. I think he achieved to a very, very great degree in that film.
As a very disciplined artist, as a very strict professional, he was also very harsh on himself. I mean, I've interviewed so many artists, but I haven't heard of anyone firstly taking months to make a huge canvas and then entirely destroying it if you don't like it. So that's really completely cutting yourself off from the work.
I mean, I can't speak for him, but I think his perfectionism is definitely something that I've inherited from him. And
so,
and I
do you destroy films, or do you?
I haven't destroyed a film yet, but I definitely think that it comes from a place of non-attachment for me.
Yes.
A place of non-attachment and non-ego, where you don't want to believe that something is good enough to put into the world just because you did it. You know, I think it's a great responsibility to be making images. I know he's told me this in not so many words, that it's a great responsibility to have a camera in your hand and to be out in the world capturing images that you're going to share with thousands and thousands of people. And you have to take this seriously. You know, it's not joking around. So you have to evaluate the work dispassionately and talk about with yourself whether the intent was captured in the work, or whether just the fact that you maybe had a moving experience while you were creating the work, and it didn't translate into the final image, is that good enough reason to put it out into the world. So this is a rigor of the artistic method that I think I definitely have in my own way developed and inspired by his discipline.
I've met him so many times in my reporting life and in my journalism career, and of course been a huge fan of his work. You're of course building your own cultural legacy and identity through your own work, which is award winning, which is landmark, and which is really taking it to another point altogether, another peak altogether. But if one is to, in your style and sensibility, if one is to make a film on Tyeb Mehta, on his life, on his art, how would you approach that? Because we've seen a lot of typical documentaries on modern Indian art. And I personally would really like to see something that is breaking barriers and breaking that whole mold of how a documentary is made on an artist. And how would you approach that?
Absolutely. You know, that's such a good question. And that's such a wonderful project. You know, our perspective on it, mine, my mother's, and the family's perspective on it is definitely of the person that we saw, who was, a human being and also an artist. And I think everybody else sees it maybe the other way around. They see the artist and the icon first, and then if they had, access to him or they knew him personally, then they see the person behind the work. And right. So I think anything that I did, and it's something that we've been sort of developing and working on for a long time now, and hopefully it comes to fruition. Is a documentary that sees the human being first, sees him from our perspective, which is really the only perspective we can honestly embody, I think, because we knew him so closely. Is giving people hopefully a perspective on it that shows where the work was coming from in terms of his personal life, in terms of how he spent his childhood and how he grew up and how he sort of grew into this icon that people know as Tyeb Mehta, and so much has been written about that person, and we're more interested in sort of what's the formative part of that, and what's behind the work, and his process, and how he dealt with the challenges that came in his way, through to the end of his life. He was always struggling with creative challenges and also other things. So that's our sort of inroad into his story. And hopefully we get to make it someday.
Absolutely. I look forward to that as well, because I've seen how differently he was projected by the art market and the media vis-a-vis how he was as a person. And I look forward to more brilliant films from your side. It's been fascinating looking at your work and tracking your journey, and many more decades to go, Farhad. So
thank you.
To you, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us and our viewers here at Hunar Charcha.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for having me. Bye.